End days at Sega. One day at Sega of America, SOA, its vice president Ken Balthaser had a meeting with all the producers, and Sega of Europe, SOE, its head Mark Cerny and his team. I had met Mark Cerny here and there over the years, and I can attest that he is what they would call a royal prick or an a-hole. More politely speaking, Mark Cerny was a jerk. Mark Cerny looked as he acted. He was conceited in his choice of words, condescending tone and mannerisms. He wore tight-fitting yuppie, which was Young Upwardly Mobile Professional Individual, acronym of the time, and fashionable clothing. And he extolled his own grandeur and his importance to anyone that he met, regardless of their interest in hearing how great he was. Even when there was no sensible opportunity for Mark Cerny to interject himself, he would rudely declare how great he was, or one of his ideas being brilliant and should be used. Mark Cerny really was a yuppie. He was obsessed with material things and financial success, no matter what harm it may have on others. The meeting with Mark Cerny at Sega was arduous and painful, but finally it ended and Mark returned to Sega of Europe, SOE. As an aside, years later, when I was Chief Technology Officer at Electronic Arts in Canada, EA's worldwide CTO, Scott Krantz, asked me to join him at an EA CTO worldwide conference that he was hosting. To my horror, Mark Cerny was attending as well. Cerny was there representing Sony. He had weaseled himself into a senior executive position in Sony of Europe and was there at the CTO conference to pitch how Sony could help Electronic Arts port its games to the PlayStation more effectively and attain higher performance, faster games with more special effects. Mark pitched Sony would offer engineers to work side by side with EA developers to both code and show them how to maximize Sony hardware and its capabilities. He promised exclusive access to low-level hardware interfaces. He offered to have Sony engineers optimize EA games, independent of Electronic Arts engineers, so as not to impact work schedules by EA. And then Mark offered they would reduce manufacturing costs and cash incentives they would offer. Mark offered everything that EA could possibly want: engineers, money, and access to hidden hardware and programming interfaces, and all EA had to do was accept the offer. Of course, Electronic Arts signed the deal with the devil, Mark Cerny. It made sense. They should have made the deal for business reasons. But it was a clever Mephistophelian deal that made sure EA games were on Sony's console, and Sony could learn all of EA's inner software tricks. And they would learn what tools EA made, licensed, and otherwise used. Once EA made a game on a platform, they would reliably publish sequels on them ongoing. Mark's getting a game on a Sony platform assured that EA would publish on all future Sony consoles as well. Reluctantly, I must admit that Mark Cerny cleverly manipulated EA executives into investing in making all of their games on Sony platforms for far less money than they would have had to pay directly to entice EA to make the games without Sony's involvement. But I did not like Mark Cerny, and while I had to agree with the decision, it felt wrong to empower his return to Sony of Europe as a success, having locked Electronic Arts into making a series of PlayStation games for development support, discounted manufacturing fees, and a token cash incentive. No matter how much of a scumbag someone is, they seem to succeed and flourish. It's sad, wrong, but it was and is reality. Sega's worry that I was overqualified turned out not to be the thing they should have worried about. They should have worried about my integrity. Sega of America's leadership was bad. They funded development studios that employed illegal aliens as indentured servants. They signed contracts with developers regardless of their ability to deliver quality games, just to fulfill a quota so they could earn personal bonuses. They did not care about the quality of developer lives or game quality or hitting delivery dates. It seemed to me that Sega of America leadership was solely about duping Sega of Japan out of money so they could incompetently play publisher while collecting big paychecks. I was so disillusioned with Sega and the inner workings of a so-called world-class video game console manufacturer. The head of development came to me and he told me that I needed to be on a flight to Georgia the next morning to a developer. It was important. Well, I was okay with dropping everything and getting on a plane. It was presumably my new job as a producer, a reasonable expectation. Okay, how do I arrange flights and details, I asked. Easy enough. Work with the admin and she will let me know what booking details are required and she would book the tickets and let me know. Anything else, I would bill myself and get reimbursed. I learned that I had to travel, however, economy coach across the country. Did they know who I was? I was not a lowly producer. I was a proven video game developer with a great resume and history. And being disillusioned with the nasty executives, I was not pleased. And besides, it was me. So what did I expect? Well, I expected first class for any flight that was over 2 hours. I would learn that my expectations were inflated. But that's how I felt, even if it was entitled. I could not let such low integrity business dealings and decisions go on, in addition to having insufficient recognition for my grandeur. So I declared I quit. In some ways, their original concern that I was overqualified, like I said, might have even been the root of my resignation in truth. Because when I think about it, it is because of my success and expertise that I felt entitled to have an opinion on what developers should be signed and who was capable of delivering quality and why I should have higher grade accommodations for travel. Yeah, that opinion on appropriate travel accommodations and expectations of only signing legally staffed qualified developers was why I resigned. It is remarkable, though, when I think of it, that company leaders are often just as morally corrupt as laborers on the assembly line. It does not matter how high and mighty or how well paid someone is. They can be just as corrupt, selfish, and evil like anyone else. Ken Balthaser and Mark Cerny proved that. And in came Sony. Sony saw the video game market eating into its entertainment and film industries, and it needed to get in on the action of video games too. Sony of Japan formed a US-based arm to operate as a manufacturer, licensor, and publisher of games for its new platform, the Sony PlayStation. It was natively a 3D video game console, but also had traditional 2D console capabilities. The PlayStation was genuinely the next generation of gaming consoles. Nintendo countered Sony with its new Nintendo 64 gaming console. Sega was slow to react, but they introduced a stopgap console called the Sega 32X, and then quickly followed up with its Sega Saturn. As an aside, Sony's game divisions were extremely important to Sony's global operations. Its game divisions eventually became Sony's only profitable division, and left Sony Pictures and Movies' other divisions groveling at their feet to make game versions of their IP. The three video game console superpowers waged the console wars for decades. Sega, Nintendo, and Sony were the centerpieces of the console wars. There were many other smaller gaming consoles in the industry over time. There were numerous alternative flavors of gaming consoles, even handheld devices, but none of them took off or gained much notoriety. Eventually, Sega lost its competitive edge and its cool factor, and it would die. Much like Atari Games eventually sold off its assets and game intellectual properties, so did Sega sell its intellectual properties IP. Sega Soft was formed as a custodian and shepherd over Sega's assets and published personal computer versions of its legacy games. Sega Soft languished, however, and it too faded into oblivion. All that people remember now, maybe, is Sonic the Hedgehog and perchance his sidekick Tails. Sega was knocked out, KO. As the three superpowers seem to have become two superpowers, a third superpower was rising: Microsoft, Xbox. Microsoft was determined to put a cool and hip face on its corporate evil empire image of Microsoft corporate enterprise. It would take stupid money over decades, but Microsoft would not only compete with the video game console superpowers, but it would become the #1 video game console for many, many years. Sony and Microsoft Xbox vied for supremacy since the beginning, and their war rages on to this day. They have and still fight tooth and nail for market dominance. Having multiple huge competing consoles and publishers is great for developers and gamers, because there will always be more games, bigger competitive budgets and teams, and therefore there will be better games. Everyone wins in the console wars. Microsoft joined the fray with its new video game console, the Xbox. Xbox started with problems, including a $1 billion recall over a critical hardware failure known as the Red Ring of Death. The LED green power lights for the Xbox would blink red on a very specific system failure. Such a fatal system failure would happen randomly within many Xbox consoles, resulting in mass returns and very upset gamers. Microsoft executives were furious. The Xbox console was created to engender goodwill and love of Microsoft, and specifically to overshadow its evil empire, corporate enterprise image. And now, it was doing the opposite. Xbox was making Microsoft look incompetent and bad to consumers. Microsoft issued a $1 billion recall supporting any Xbox returned would receive a brand new Xbox without any questions asked, and they would cover all shipping. It was an insane amount of money, but it was consistent with Microsoft's approach for Xbox. Spend and lose money as a marketing campaign for Microsoft corporate goodwill. Microsoft was intent on buying their way to become the top video game console platform. Xbox would triumph over time through sheer cash investment and determination. It developed games internally and contracted externally developed games as well. It purchased development studios outright. It signed long-term exclusive deals with game makers. It is remarkable to look back and see how much of the video game industry had its foundation formed and paved by scrappy underdogs, and then grown huge by mega corporate money and investors. I'm glad that I was an early founder when the industry was more real.